The auction yard was quiet except for the hum of traffic from the highway and the dry shuffle of gravel under hesitant feet. A row of identical blue storage doors stretched like a line of sealed promises, each one waiting for someone desperate enough to open it. Among the bidders stood Emily Parker, a 32-year-old single mother with a faded denim jacket and the look of someone who'd learned to hide exhaustion behind polite focus. Her hand rested in her coat pocket, fingers gripping an envelope with every dollar she could spare. Emily hadn't planned to be here. 2 weeks earlier, her second job at the diner had cut hours, and the power company had sent another yellow notice taped to her door. Her 8-year-old son, Noah, had been pretending not to hear the conversations about overdue bills. She told him things would be fine, but fine was no longer a place she knew how to reach. When a friend mentioned online auctions for abandoned storage units, cheap chances that sometimes hid forgotten value, Emily had laughed it off. Until that morning. Until she saw the list of units scheduled for sale at a facility just outside town and realized bidding cost nothing but courage. Now, under a sky the color of metal, she waited. Each door the auctioneer rolled up revealed disappointment. Cracked furniture, damp boxes, things that smelled like endings. The crowd thinned as buyers dropped out one by one, muttering that the haul wasn't worth the cleanup. When the man stopped before Unit 34, he pulled the latch with a loud snap, and a dull metallic scent drifted out. Inside, from floor to ceiling, the space was packed with black trash bags. Dozens of them. They were neatly stacked, pressed against each wall like a dark puzzle. No visible furniture. No labels. Just row after row of tightly tied plastic and a single silver moving dolly leaning against the far corner. The crowd groaned. A few chuckled. Pure garbage, someone muttered. Emily didn't laugh. She noticed how clean the floor near the door looked. No dust, no debris. Whoever had filled this unit hadn't dumped things. They'd arranged them. She thought about the way her late mother used to store clothes for winter, sealed and labeled so neatly it felt like a promise to the future. The sight of that tidy chaos pulled something in her chest she couldn't name. The bidding began at 200. No hands went up. 100, the auctioneer asked, impatient. Emily's stomach twisted. $100 was her grocery budget for the week. Yet the thought of walking away felt heavier than the risk. She lifted her hand. The auctioneer looked almost surprised before nodding. Sold. Unit 34, 100 even. A ripple of murmurs passed through the yard, half pity, half amusement. Paperwork blurred into movement, signatures, a key, a gate code written on a sticky note. Emily barely heard the instructions. 48 hours to clear the unit. After that, a fine. She slipped the key onto her keyring beside the one for her apartment and felt the small weight of consequence. The others drove off in pickup trucks. She stayed, staring at the blue door that now belonged to her, wondering if she just bought herself a miracle or a mountain of regret. By early afternoon the sun pressed hard on the asphalt, and the metal doors gleamed like mirrors. Emily parked her aging sedan near the unit, rolled up her sleeves, and set a crate with cleaning gloves and trash tags beside her. For a moment she just listened, to the buzz of a faraway mower, to the slow, nervous rhythm of her own breath. Then she bent to the padlock, turned the key, and lifted the latch. The metal door rose with a groan, rolling into its track. The air that escaped wasn't foul. It was heavy, dry, and still, like a room that hadn't been entered in years. The trash bags filled the entire space, stacked so perfectly they looked deliberate. Sunlight touched the glossy plastic and bounced back in dull reflections, making the whole unit shimmer faintly. She crouched, reached for the nearest bag, and pressed its surface. Solid. Not loose trash. Inside was something with corners. Boxes, maybe. She hesitated. People online always said, "Never judge a unit until you dig 2 layers deep." She remembered that line now and almost smiled. Still, the thought of cutting open 100 sealed bags under the clock of a 48-hour deadline made her throat tighten. She could almost hear Noah asking if they'd finally found a lucky break. She couldn't afford to tell him no again. Emily stepped back to get a better look. The extension cord she'd noticed earlier ran neatly along the base of the right wall, coiled at the center as if waiting to be plugged in. On instinct, she followed it to the end, but there was no outlet. The cord stopped at a small, unplugged power strip lying on the floor. No dust on it either. Someone had packed this place carefully and recently. She leaned against the door frame, shading her eyes. There was no story yet, just questions. Who had filled the space? Why so organized? Why pay rent for so long and then walk away? In her world, people didn't abandon things unless something bigger than debt chased them. When the wind shifted, the plastic rustled softly, like whispered movement. Emily's pulse quickened. For a moment she thought one of the bags had shifted on its own, but it was only air from the open door. Still, the sound left a prickling along her skin. She stepped inside, letting the shadow of the door swallow her from the bright afternoon. The space felt smaller than it had from outside. The bags formed aisles narrow enough that she had to turn sideways to move between them. She brushed one with her elbow, and something metallic clinked faintly inside. Her heart jumped, then steadied. Toys? Tools? She couldn't tell. She pulled her phone from her pocket and switched on the flashlight. The beam caught something at the far end, a small reflective strip of silver duct tape marking one particular bag in the corner. The only one marked. She stared at it for a long time. Maybe it was just random. Maybe someone had planned to come back for that one bag and never did. She took a step closer, the sound of her shoes soft on the concrete. The light from the door stretched long behind her. She reached out and brushed the taped bag with her fingertips. It was colder than the rest. Outside, a car engine started and faded down the road, leaving only silence. The air inside the unit thickened, still and expectant. Emily's pulse quickened again. She let her hand rest on the taped bag, feeling the shape beneath the plastic. Flat, rectangular, maybe a box. She almost opened it, but stopped herself. It was late already. She'd need to bring stronger gloves, boxes, and probably help tomorrow. She stepped back into daylight and pulled the door down until it latched, sealing the darkness away. The clang echoed through the empty yard. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the metal, tired but determined. She had 48 hours to find out whether she just bought a pile of garbage, or the only chance she had left to change her life. The next morning broke colder than it should have. A thin fog hung low over the lot, softening the harsh edges of the storage facility's blue doors. Emily's breath clouded as she waited for the keypad gate to slide open, clutching a thermos of instant coffee and the same nervous hope she'd gone to sleep with. The key to Unit 34 felt heavier today, as though it already knew more than she did. She had spent half the night scrolling through videos of other storage buyers, trying to learn from their strategies, how to sort quickly, what to save, what to dump. Everyone made it look easier than it felt. They spoke in confident voices about profit margins and the thrill of the find. But when Emily looked around the empty asphalt rows, there was no thrill, just a quiet loneliness that made her whisper a small prayer she hadn't said in years. The door rolled up smoother this time, the metal warmer under her hand. Morning light poured into the unit and settled across the glossy black bags, reflecting a faint silver sheen. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it, except for one thing. The marked bag with the strip of duct tape was no longer leaning in the corner. It stood upright, centered at the back like it had been moved. Emily froze. She scanned the space, checking for footprints or shifted dust, but the concrete floor looked the same. Maybe she'd remembered wrong. Maybe she was imagining things because she was tired. Still, she felt her pulse quicken as she stepped inside and set her crate of tools by the door. She started with the front row. Each bag gave a different kind of resistance when lifted, like strangers holding secrets in silence. The first one tore easily under her box cutter. Inside were piles of folded men's shirts sealed in plastic, most with price tags from a closed thrift shop. The next held kitchen items, stacks of plates wrapped in newspaper dated 6 years ago. The third contained toys, some still in their packaging, dolls, puzzles, a remote-controlled car missing its controller. It was as if someone had been building an inventory for a yard sale that never happened. She worked methodically, sorting into piles just outside the unit. Keep, donate, trash. By the time the sun climbed higher, she had opened 8 bags and found nothing remarkable, only fragments of someone else's attempt at organization. But the calm rhythm of unpacking soothed her. She wasn't losing money yet. Most of these things could sell at the flea market. Halfway through another bag, her cutter snagged on something hard. She peeled back the plastic carefully and found an old wooden jewelry box, the lacquer cracked but shining faintly in the light. Inside were dozens of coins, all foreign, Canadian, Mexican, a few she couldn't recognize. Not valuable, probably, but heavy and clean. She smiled for the first time that day and slipped them into a side pouch of her tote. Tiny victories counted. Around noon, she sat on the edge of the concrete lip, unwrapped her sandwich, and watched a small sparrow hop between the puddles near the drain. For a moment the world felt normal. Maybe this gamble would pay off after all. She even found herself whispering a small, practical plan. If she cleared a few $100s, she'd catch up on utilities and buy Noah a used bike for summer. Then, just as she turned back toward the unit, she heard it, a faint thunk, dull and short, like something falling against metal inside the stacks. Her breath caught. The sound came from deep within, somewhere behind the last row of bags. She waited, straining her ears. Nothing. Silence pressed heavy again. Maybe it was one of the bags settling under its own weight. But she couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't sounded like plastic. It had sounded hollow, like a locker door closing. Caution warred with curiosity, but curiosity always won in stories like this, and she had paid to find out what kind of story hers would be. She took the flashlight, weaving deeper into the narrow aisles she'd created, moving slow so the floor wouldn't echo. The air grew cooler the further she went, dust floating in the thin light that reached from the doorway. She found the marked bag again. It hadn't been moved after all. It just looked different in the daylight, though she couldn't explain why it felt slightly bulged on one side now. She sliced the tape along the seam, hands trembling just enough to make the light from her phone shake. The plastic peeled open with a dry hiss. Inside was another bag, smaller, tied with red string instead of plastic. Emily hesitated, staring at the knot. Whoever had packed this wanted it secure. She loosened the string, and the inner bag fell open to reveal a tangle of wires and black cables, all coiled together around a rectangular object wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped the fabric carefully and uncovered a small, flat-screen monitor, the kind used for security systems or old computer setups. The screen was dusty, but unbroken. She turned it over in her hands and found a label, Property of SafeView Security, Return if found. Her stomach sank. Why would someone store surveillance equipment inside sealed trash bags? She scanned the walls of the unit again, noticing faint rectangular marks in the dust higher up, places where something had once been mounted and later removed. Cameras, maybe. Emily set the monitor on the dolly near the entrance and continued to search through the same bag. Beneath the wires was a box of notebooks, every one identical, black covers without titles. She flipped one open and frowned. Each page was filled with neat, tiny handwriting, dates, times, and what looked like addresses. None of them meant anything to her, but the sheer precision of it made her uneasy. By late afternoon, she had opened 15 bags and found a pattern: clothing, electronics, documents, all too organized to belong to a hoarder, too random to belong to a store. Whoever packed this unit hadn't been discarding things. They'd been storing evidence. When the wind shifted again, the bags rustled like a slow wave. She stepped back, uneasy, and turned toward the entrance. On the ground near the power strip, she saw something she hadn't noticed before, a small white sticker half hidden beneath her tote bag. She picked it up. Printed on it was a barcode and a single word, inventory. For the first time that day, a chill crawled up her spine. She looked over the stacked rows of plastic, the uniform way they stood like soldiers waiting for orders, and realized this wasn't a random collection of junk. It was a system. Someone had meant to keep track of every item, every bag, every piece. As the daylight began to fade, Emily closed the door and locked it again, the clang echoing louder than before. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the blue metal surface, trying to steady her breathing. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe just the remnants of some failed business. But deep down, she knew better. There was order in this chaos. Too much order. And tomorrow she'd have to decide whether to keep digging or walk away before whatever secret lived behind those bags decided to meet her halfway. By the time Emily returned on the third morning, a thin rain had rinsed the lot clean. The sky was still gray, heavy with clouds that blurred the distant rooftops, and every step across the wet asphalt sounded louder than it should. She balanced a borrowed dolly and a cardboard box filled with cleaning supplies, gloves, and lunch. The key felt cold against her palm, and for a heartbeat she wondered if she should turn around, drive home, and pretend she had never bought this unit. The thought passed. Cowardice was a luxury she couldn't afford. Noah's school had sent another reminder about overdue cafeteria fees. Rent was due in 9 days. The unit might be a mistake, but it was her mistake, and that gave her the right to see it through. The door clattered up, breaking the silence. The air inside smelled faintly metallic now, like rain on old wiring. Emily hesitated before stepping in. Yesterday's unease still sat in her stomach like a stone. The marked bag, the notebooks, the strange organization of it all. It didn't add up. Whoever had filled this space had meant to keep things hidden but reachable. It felt less like garbage and more like storage for someone who hadn't wanted to be found. She began opening bags in a deliberate rhythm, focusing on the center rows that she hadn't touched. One by one, the contents built a quiet mosaic of obsession. Bundles of identical brown envelopes labeled only with numbers, a stack of disposable cell phones with dead batteries, a shoebox full of single keys tied with masking tape. Each item on its own meant nothing, but together they hummed with purpose. Every discovery tightened the air a little more, as if the walls were leaning closer to listen. At first, she thought one of the bags was filled with clothes again. The plastic stretched tight over fabric shapes, and when she cut through the seam, soft material spilled out. But this time it wasn't clothing. Dozens of old photographs fluttered onto the floor, printed snapshots, glossy and faded at the edges. Most showed people in front of storefronts or houses, smiling, unaware. The handwriting on the back of each photo listed names and dates, always the same year. Emily crouched down, fingers trembling as she flipped through them. None of the faces were familiar, yet something about the consistent neatness of the writing made her feel watched. She stacked the photos carefully into one of the boxes she'd brought, unsure if she wanted to keep them or burn them. She forced herself to keep working. The more she uncovered, the more deliberate everything became. Receipts, warranty cards, even instruction manuals filed in perfect alphabetical order. A strange kind of admiration flickered in her. Whoever packed this had treated order as religion. And then, at the very back of the third row, she found something different. A large plastic bin sat beneath 2 heavy bags. The lid was taped shut with layers of gray tape, the word, "fragile," scrawled across it in thick black marker. Emily cut through the tape and lifted the lid. Inside were 10 identical white binders. No dust, no moisture, just pristine pages filled with typed lists. Serial numbers. Item descriptions. Quantities. Each binder cataloged a different category: electronics, appliances, jewelry. Every single bag she had opened so far appeared somewhere in those lists, with dates of acquisition and values neatly recorded beside them. Someone had treated the unit like a private warehouse. For a moment she just stared, heart beating faster with a mixture of relief and dread. Relief because it explained the precision. Dread because the entries didn't stop at household items. The last binder listed names. Dozens of them. Each line had a name, an address, and a note marked retrieved or pending. Her throat went dry. These weren't inventory logs for merchandise. They were records of people. She backed away, blinking, telling herself she was misreading it. Maybe these were customer records from a repossession company or a moving service that had gone under. There were explanations. There had to be. She glanced toward the smaller monitor from the previous day, still sitting by the door, its blank screen catching the light like an unblinking eye. If she could find the main device that powered it, maybe she'd finally understand what all this had been for. Emily moved deeper, pulling out another sealed bag near the corner. This one was heavier than the rest, its surface marked with faint scuffs. When she opened it, she found a small metal lockbox wrapped in newspaper. The key was still taped to the lid. She peeled it off, slid it into the slot, and turned. The lock clicked open easily, too easily. Inside was a collection of USB drives, each labeled with dates. The earliest was nearly 10 years old. The newest was from 6 months ago, the same month the rent on this unit had stopped being paid. Rain drummed harder on the roof above her. For the first time she noticed how alone she was. The lot's office had closed an hour ago, and her car was the only one left in sight. She tucked the drives into her bag and told herself she'd look at them at home, where lights and voices could make them feel less like evidence. By the time she sealed the door again, the fog had thickened into a fine mist that coated her hair and face. She stood in the quiet, one hand resting on the cold metal, her mind racing with half-formed questions. If this was the inventory of a business, why abandon it? And if it wasn't, then what exactly had she just uncovered? She drove home through sheets of rain, headlights glinting off puddles that looked deeper than they were. The USB drives sat on the passenger seat, sliding slightly with each turn. She didn't want to touch them yet. Not until she could breathe. When she reached her apartment, Noah was already asleep on the couch, schoolbooks spread across his lap. She tucked a blanket around him, brushed his hair from his forehead, and stood there a moment, feeling the strange disconnect between the safety of home and the unease in her chest. The drives waited on the counter, silent, small, but impossibly heavy. Emily poured herself a cup of cold coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened her laptop. The first drive clicked into place with a tiny chime. The screen blinked once, twice, and a folder appeared. Inside were hundreds of files, each named with a date and a single word: footage. She hesitated only a second before opening one. The video showed a grainy feed from a camera pointed at a suburban street. Cars passed. A man walked a dog. Another clip showed a different location, a parking lot, maybe. Then another, showing the entrance to what looked like a grocery store. Ordinary places. Ordinary days. All filmed from hidden angles. Her hand went cold on the mouse. Every folder was like this, clips of strangers going about their lives, unaware of the camera watching them. She scrolled through the timestamps. The most recent videos were from 2 months ago, right before the unit went delinquent. She closed the laptop slowly, the click of the hinge loud in the empty apartment. The rain had stopped outside, leaving only the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock. For a long time, she sat without moving. The files, the notebooks, the inventory logs, everything pointed to one truth she didn't want to face. Whoever had rented Unit 34 hadn't been storing junk. They'd been storing records, watching people, collecting pieces of their lives. And now all of it belonged to her. The morning after the discovery began quietly, almost deceptively so. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen in pale strips, glinting off the silver of Emily's laptop as it sat closed on the table, untouched since the night before. The USB drives lay beside it in a shallow ceramic bowl where she dropped them like they were contaminated. She had barely slept. Each time her eyes closed, she saw the stillness of those video clips, normal people walking through parking lots, stepping into stores, living their lives while someone silently watched. She told herself she would hand everything over to the police, that it wasn't her problem anymore. But even as she rehearsed what she might say, doubt shadowed every thought. What if the footage was harmless? What if it belonged to a private investigator or a security contractor? What if she walked into a police station only to discover she'd stolen evidence that wasn't hers to touch? A single mother with a record of unpaid bills and a storage key didn't make a very credible witness. By mid-morning, she decided to at least finish clearing the unit before deciding anything. The rent on the space was already eating into her last paycheck, and she couldn't afford a fine on top of that. So she packed coffee, gloves, and a quiet resolve, and drove back to the facility, trying not to look at the rearview mirror too often. The air outside was warmer, the pavement still damp from the rain. Everything looked normal. Maybe that was the strangest part, how normal it all seemed. The gate code worked as usual. The office was open, the clerk barely glancing up from his paperwork when she waved. Unit 34 stood waiting, its blue door streaked with dust and rainwater. Emily unlocked it, the padlock cool beneath her fingers, and pulled the door up. The familiar dry air rolled out, tinged faintly with the smell of plastic and metal. For a moment she felt foolish for being afraid. But something was wrong. A single bag from the front row had been moved. It lay half-collapsed near the entrance, as though someone had stepped on it or dragged it out of the stack. She stood motionless, scanning the ground for footprints. The concrete was clean, but a faint trail of dry dust curved from the doorway toward the back of the unit. Her first thought was raccoons, or maybe a worker checking locks, but none of that made sense. The latch had been secure, her own padlock untouched. She crouched to examine the bag. It was one she had already opened the day before. She remembered the contents, a box of photo albums and a handful of papers. Now the albums were gone. Only loose pages remained, torn at the binding, fluttering slightly in the draft. The box of notebooks was still stacked against the far wall, but one of them sat open as if someone had flipped through it and left in a hurry. A chill climbed up her arms. The possibility that another buyer or facility worker might have entered seemed impossible. The only key was in her purse. She forced herself to keep working. Logic was her only defense. She needed to act as if everything was fine. She started bagging up the items she'd already sorted for donation. The repetition steadied her breathing. But when she turned toward the dolly near the door, she stopped again. The small monitor, the one labeled Safe View Security, was gone. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She checked every corner, lifting bags, scanning the floor, but it wasn't there. A monitor didn't just vanish. Someone had come into the unit. Emily stepped outside into the weak sunlight, trying to see if any cameras overlooked this row. There were none, only the blank faces of other units, silent and sealed. The office window reflected her small figure, alone and uncertain. She drove home in a haze, hands gripping the wheel too tightly. Every red light felt longer than the last. When she parked in front of her apartment building, her phone vibrated on the passenger seat. A new message from an unknown number: "Stop touching what isn't yours." No name, no signature, just that single line. Her breath caught. She stared at the screen until it dimmed, then locked the doors out of reflex. For several minutes she sat in the car, mind racing. It could be a prank, wrong number, maybe. But she hadn't shared the story with anyone except the storage clerk who'd handled the paperwork. No one else even knew the unit's number. Inside the apartment, Noah was at the table, drawing a rocket ship on loose notebook paper. He looked up and smiled, and for a heartbeat everything felt simple again. Emily returned the smile, though her hands still shook. She set her bag down quietly, making sure he didn't see the drives she kept inside. The last thing she wanted was to drag him into her fear. That evening she tried to distract herself with chores, laundry, dishes, anything repetitive. But the phone stayed on the counter, screen dark, like a waiting eye. She told herself not to answer any unknown calls, not to overthink. Yet when the first ring came, sharp and loud, she flinched hard enough to drop a glass. It shattered on the tile, the sound echoing. The caller ID read unknown. She didn't pick up. The ringing stopped after 4 tones. Then silence. Then a voicemail notification. Her thumb hovered over the screen before pressing play. Static filled the speaker first, low, irregular, and then a man's voice, distant, muffled, like recorded through a cheap microphone. "You don't understand what you found. Leave it alone, Emily." Her name. He knew her name. She dropped the phone on the counter as though it had burned her. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The logical part of her brain scrambled for explanations. A scam, an automated message, coincidence. But every rational argument collapsed under the weight of her own certainty. This was about the unit, about the files. She thought of the police again. But what would she tell them? That she bought a storage unit full of old electronics and someone texted her? Without proof, she'd sound unhinged. She could already picture the board officer taking notes, promising to look into it. Night fell early, the windows reflecting only darkness. She made sure the front door's deadbolt was locked twice. Noah slept in his room, oblivious. Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at the drives. Curiosity gnawed at her fear. Whoever had sent that message wanted her to stop looking. So maybe the answer, the real danger, was still hidden in one of the remaining files. Slowly, she opened the laptop again. The soft glow of the screen filled the kitchen. She plugged in the second USB. Inside, more folders. But these weren't labeled footage. They were named after dates and locations, streets she recognized from around town. One folder was labeled Maple Drive, 11:47 p.m. Her heart thudded as she clicked it open. The grainy video showed a familiar building, her own apartment complex. The view came from across the street, half hidden by a row of trees. Headlights passed, then faded. For a long moment the camera stayed still, watching. And then, near the bottom corner of the frame, she saw it. A reflection in the window of her kitchen, her own face moving past the glass, carrying a mug of tea. She slammed the laptop shut, heart in her throat. The video stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. The phone vibrated once more on the counter, face down, as if something unseen waited for her to pick it up. Emily didn't move. Outside, a car rolled slowly down the street, tires whispering on wet asphalt. She stayed perfectly still, watching the faint light through the curtains, realizing at last that whoever had filled that unit hadn't just been watching strangers. They had been watching her. And now they knew she was watching back. The following morning arrived without dawn. The sky outside Emily's window was the color of dull iron, heavy with low clouds that refused to move. She sat at the kitchen table, still wearing yesterday's sweater, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold hours ago. The laptop stayed closed. The drives were sealed in a plastic food container beside it, taped twice over, as if she could trap whatever knowledge they carried. But the image of her own reflection in that video refused to fade. Every creak of the apartment made her tense. When Noah's door opened, she nearly jumped. He appeared in the hallway, hair messy, rubbing his eyes, asking if they were still going to the park that weekend. Emily forced a smile and said maybe. Her voice sounded foreign to her. She needed to be strong for him. Fear couldn't be part of his morning. After breakfast she packed him for school, double-checked the locks, and waited by the window until the bus turned the corner. Only then did she allow the exhaustion to wash over her. She couldn't keep living inside the shadow. The threat had already crossed into her life. Pretending ignorance wouldn't make it vanish. She pulled out her phone and searched for local police contacts. But before she could press call, a new message appeared. "We told you to stop. You have something that isn't yours." No number this time, only private sender. She read it twice, her pulse thudding in her ears. Then another message followed. "Meet us. We can take it back and no one gets hurt." Emily stared at the words until they blurred. Logic screamed at her to delete everything, to hand the drives over to the police. But there was no guarantee the police would even believe her, and if these people already knew where she lived, turning to them might only provoke them further. She typed a reply with shaking hands. "Who are you?" No answer. Hours passed in nervous silence. The day outside thickened into gray again. Finally, her phone buzzed one more time with a single address, a storage facility on the edge of town. Not her facility, another one. Below it, "Tonight. Bring the box." Alone. She closed her eyes, trying to think. There was no reason to trust a message like that. And yet, something inside her, the same stubborn instinct that had driven her to buy Unit 34 in the first place, refused to back down. Maybe it was foolishness or desperation. But she needed answers. She needed to end this. As dusk settled, she drove out of the city, the taped container on the passenger seat beside her. The roads narrowed into industrial lots and half-empty warehouses. The location from the text was real, a small, older facility, the kind with rusting doors and faded numbers. Only one security light burned near the gate. The rest was shadow. She parked, leaving the engine idling for warmth. No one waited outside. She checked her phone again. Nothing. For a moment she considered turning around. But then, through the drizzle, she noticed something familiar. A blue sedan parked at the far end of the lot, identical to the one she'd seen in the background of several surveillance clips. Emily gripped the drives tighter, her breath fogging the glass. Whoever had filmed those videos had been here before. This was their ground. She stepped out, shoes crunching on gravel, and approached the sedan slowly. As she drew closer, she saw that the driver's door was open slightly, the dome light faintly glowing inside. "Hello," she called out, voice steady but low. No answer. She moved closer. The car was empty. The passenger seat, however, wasn't. A small envelope lay there, sealed, with her name written in block letters. She hesitated before opening it. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, typed, "Precise. You were never supposed to open it. The footage belongs to a discontinued project. The files are government property. If you speak, you'll be held accountable for possession of classified material. Leave the drives and walk away." Her hands trembled. Government property? It sounded absurd, like something out of a bad thriller. And yet the tone, the calculated neutrality of the words, chilled her more than the threats. There was no anger here, no emotion, just instruction. Emily stood there in the thin rain, staring at the car that smelled faintly of old paper and dust, and understood that she had no real leverage. Whoever had sent these messages wasn't bluffing. They had resources. They knew her name, her address, maybe even where Noah went to school. She looked down at the plastic container in her hand, the drives she had already sealed, as if her instinct had known they were dangerous. A few days ago, she'd seen them as a chance at money, at maybe fixing her life. Now they were poison. She set the container gently on the passenger seat, closed the door, and stepped back. Her reflection caught briefly in the glass, pale and tired. When she turned to leave, she noticed a movement in the shadows. A figure standing by one of the units, motionless, watching. It didn't approach, didn't speak. Just stood there as she walked back to her car, started the engine and pulled away. No one followed. No messages came. By the time she reached the city again, the sky had started to clear, streaks of blue showing through the clouds. She drove straight to Noah's school, parking across the street, watching as the last students came out. He spotted her car and waved, running toward her with that easy, unguarded smile that still belonged entirely to childhood. When he climbed into the passenger seat, she reached over and pulled him into a brief hug, longer than usual. He laughed, asking what that was for. "Nothing," she said. "Just glad to see you." That night, after he'd gone to bed, Emily opened her laptop one last time. The desktop was empty. Every folder, every file from the drives was gone, wiped clean. Only a single document remained, unnamed. She clicked it open. A single line of text glowed on the screen. "Some things are safer forgotten." She stared at it for a long time, then closed the lid gently. The hum of the refrigerator and the quiet breathing from Noah's room were the only sounds left. She felt no triumph, no fear, only a deep, steady exhaustion. The truth, whatever it had been, was gone. But her life, the small, ordinary life she'd fought to hold together, was still here. The next morning, she sold the remaining items from the unit for a few $100s and handed in the key. When the manager asked if she wanted to renew her lease, she smiled faintly and shook her head. As she walked away from the row of blue doors, the wind moved through the narrow lanes of the facility, carrying the dry rustle of plastic somewhere deep inside. It sounded, for just a moment, like a whisper she couldn't quite make out, something between warning and farewell. Emily didn't look back.